We survived essentially because of luck, but we survived because people were prepared to help and protect us and save us. And obviously, if there are many Jewish families in France survived the war, there were enough Frenchmen who were conscious enough to take the risk to help their neighbor. My name is Raoul Korngold, born in France, in Strasbourg. I have virtually no memory of that time because I was born in '36. The war started in 1979, so these 3 years were rather difficult to remember for a child my age. Then my father was a well-to-do businessman and lived a very bourgeois home, a nice family, which was constituted by my mom, my dad, my mom's mother, who was a widow since the flu of 1919. When the war started, nobody in France thought that the French army will collapse. My father was mobilized like the rest of the family, but his younger brother and sisters who had been living in Germany, in Nuremberg, managed to escape, mostly because my father provided the funding for their escape out of Nazi Germany, even though they had property and they were well-to-do. And they went to Peru. Reason for that is that previously one of his sisters had married to a gentleman that managed to get his visa to Latin America. I don't know if he knew exactly where Peru was on the map, but that's how it happened. And then she managed from there to contact, with the help of my father, the rest of the family, which was sent by one of the last ships that sailed for Latin America. Only my father and a couple of uncles were stuck in France, mostly for military reasons or family reasons, or exemption or whatever. And when the front collapsed, my father had put all sorts of things on the car ready to escape. And in the morning when they went out, I was told the car was gone. For his luck, the car was traced within a day or two at the Swiss border, and nothing was taken off. Whoever took the car took it exactly for one purpose, to cross the border in a hurry. So we recuperated the car and the belongings, and then we jumped into it, and we drove out of Strasbourg, and we didn't return till 1945. My father took us and we raced now towards the south of France. And he left this wagon with his, whatever his fortune was, in Round Étape. Now I'm going to jump a few years there, because after the war, my father asked, you know, what has happened? Now, the Germans kept very, very good records. After the war, Alsatian Jews could go back, and the records were there, who had taken their property, to whom it was sold by the Nazis, how much they had paid for it, because Alsace was declared by Hitler as a German province. It was annexed to Germany as Alsace. The Nazi did not have a record of that wagon. The French claimed they had no clue of that wagon. So I come to the conclusion that the people in the region were probably the best dressed Frenchmen during the war. First we went to Bordeaux. My father did his best to get us on board ship, was sailing. He didn't, it was overloaded. And we turned around and we drove away. That's where I saw my first German soldier on a motorcycle. He was driving into Bordeaux ahead of a column. And actually the ship that my father had tried to get us on board was bombed and sunk in almost in the harbor. So we escaped from that one. We went back to Lyon. At the time, Lyon was below the demarcation line between occupied France and Vichy France. Eventually, the Germans just erased that line and came over. But at the time, we were in Lyon, in an unoccupied town. That didn't last very long. My father managed to get us a lovely apartment in a brand new building. We were the first people to move into that apartment. And it was a pink building. I wasn't aware of it. I only knew that some people were wearing yellow stars. My parents had been in Germany when they got married and knew the Nazis and knew what to expect. And it was out of the question that we were going to wear any yellow star or anything else. And progressively, this is where we started to get used to the idea that I had different names, and I, including, had different religion, and I should keep my prayer at bedtime to myself and not to say anything loud. I found in my class there were 2 or 3 other little Jewish boys, and we did our schooling together with time. But at the time when I started in 11e, things were pretty normal, and I had difficulty adapting to school. I was not the nicest kid I think around, but eventually my teacher became fond of me. She was a great lady, Mrs. Roy. She was very helpful, and I passed into the next grade. And the following year, that's when I was told by my parents, okay, you then go to the washroom with your kid, with the other kid, or stick to yourself, for obvious reason. Number 2, you're not Jewish. So remember that. And then I started progressively to be informed with other kids when there was some activity, Christian activity. I was told to go along. You know, if There were very few, but there were occasions on Thursday afternoon where a priest would come. They were authorized because France had an education system which was, of course, anti-religious, you know, French Revolution and all that. And but they were made some deals, and on Thursday afternoon, a priest occasionally came and asked if any kid would like to join in a class and hear some lesson. And I was told, you know, if this happens, you just follow suit, just get along and be good. I said, okay. This is also when I started to rehearse my second name. My first name is Raoul. My second given name is Roland. So Roland was the most simple way to give me a family name, which I would remember, and not to make it complicated. It became very critical as soon as by the end of 42, 43. Now 43 was a year of hell. 44 wasn't much better, but 43 was when the Nazis, the German and the French milice were at their worst. These were the years of unsettling. First of all, the next year, my school was taken over by the German army as barracks. So we were kicked out, and we ended up in rented spaces. And so it was not really a school, but it was some locals, were some buildings which had been readapted so that they could have classrooms in there. And we had the same teachers, who were names that I remember very well, Madame Pitra, Madame Mallet. And the one thing that I recall from all that period, that there was, I don't recall any antisemitism per se. When you say this was Jewish, and they say, no, nothing of that happened. We just went to school and everything was normal as it. But then one day, one guy came into the classroom and asked the teacher if there was any Jewish kid in the class. And she looked very offended and saying, what? There are no Jewish children in my class. I said, well, okay, and I apologize, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he left. And it was obvious that she knew. She knew that me, André, Raymond, and the other, I mean, I wasn't scared. I think I'm trying to remember what it was, but you know, with the effect of time, you start to play with your feelings. You see, I must have felt this. What I really felt, I don't think I can feel it today. I mean, be honest about it. But the only thing I can remember, I was startled. Chap, he's asking for that. And I remember, oh. So that I went into gear. Lyon was a city of the most industrial city in France. And at night it became very insecure because the resistance was also very strong. So the milice, which is a pro-Nazi army, that police that the Vichy government had raised, was established at that office in Lyon. So the resistance was very powerful in Lyon too. And this is how it happened also that we got the protection. One of the reasons why we escaped many a times of being caught was something that I figured out later, is that my parents were both had both joined one of the local unit, Yes, we jumped from safe house to safe house, and we were notified when it would happen or not. So sometimes my father would certainly be notified when we didn't have telephones. You know how he was notified, not too clear, but anyways, he was notified, and he would grab a little bag and disappear in the night, and then would come back, you know, a few days later and say that was rough sleeping on the potatoes of these guys, because they were hiding the fact that they had potatoes, but they had nowhere else to hide anybody. And it was a safe hiding space. So my father slept on the potatoes. So he came back, he had some potatoes, they had given him potatoes too. This was a Rocher. This was one of the family that we almost were a lot to. They were very Christian, very Catholic, very religious, and very much in their faith, in belief. A couple. They didn't have children, but they ran a little school for children of the lower class, you know, poor people, and they were obviously part of that network of people who provided safe lodging, you know. I was sent to summer camp, and sometimes they just have the name of summer camp, because as things became insecure in Lyon, 42, 43, mostly 43, Pétain gave the order that the children had to get out of town and to be placed in summer camps, always peasants, farmers, etc. Parents were very happy about that because those that could afford it were sending there, because if you went to live with a farmer, even though the German would take away all the production of the farmer was smart enough to have food. The one that you have the photographs on were taken in one of the summer camps which was held near Lyon by a lady by the name of Miss Barbie. I owe her life because Miss Barbie, because very simply the first Sunday that I was there, I lost it. I was just at breakfast when she said, okay, get dressed and let's go. And I said, where are we going? And she said, are you going to church? And I said, oh, we're Protestant this week. And she froze, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and I froze. She said, come to me in my office. So I followed her, and then she said, you sit here and you wait. She went out, came back with about 2 or 3 other kids, just like me, a girl, or 2 girls and 2 boys, or 3 boys, and they lined her up, and then she closed the door. So she looked at us, you're all Catholic? Good. Genuflect. Not good enough. And for the next 5 or 15 minutes, there we were, genuflecting to our satisfaction. And then we went. There was nothing else said. And this is how people survived. She could have very well said, oh, and denounced us. And the next visit, my parents would come to see me. Immediately, the family would have been taken away, never to be heard of again. But that is this is how French Jews survived. Okay, there are Jews that helped and Jews that betrayed you. And there's a story of betrayal in the building we lived in. And there was a guy called Jaime, who was a friend of family from Saverne, who lived upstairs of us. And he had a buddy who was our janitor. he went to join the Free French, and one day came back thinking that his body would be a safe house. What he didn't know is that his buddy's wife's brother had joined the milice, and they were waiting for him, and there was a shootout. And the door had bullet holes still after the war. He was shot, and Liliane, the daughter, who was about 18 at the time, was just coming home, and she found him lying there, was surrounded by the goons, the Nazis, and so on. And he just turned around and said, "Liliane, pray for me, I'm going to die." And they took him away. That night in the hospital, he vanished, in spite of the fact that he had been under surveillance. But his wounds were so... The only thing we knew, that the strange story, that he'd vanished. The resistance managed to pull him out. After the war in 1945, he came back in full regalia of the French military and as an officer, senior officer, and went to get him and arrest him personally. I just want to say that the wife of the janitor came to plead with my mother, to please, we knew that we are Jewish, we didn't denounce you, you have to do something, I don't want my husband to be executed, please. Sign a petition, say a good word about him. My mother had very cold eyes. He was not shot, but he well deserved it. You see, we were not supposed to have a shortwave radio. There's a little light bulb that goes into a radio that gives it the super-hétérondine ability to go into shortwave. And Frenchmen were not supposed to have that. They had to surrender it because we were not supposed to hear shortwave radio. The only thing you were allowed to hear was the French official radio, which was pro-Nazi. And the thing is, at night, that's where the French had this radio signal coming from London, BBC, the famous beep 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 boom. Okay, you know why it's beep 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 boom? That's from Beethoven. Yeah, but also it has a fun name in German. It's a "Kiss My Butt." In German. So anyway, that's why the Brits used it. We know it in France. So this was the thing, no? That the message would come. They were all coded. You know, Josephine is going to put on a blue dress tomorrow, things like that. Nonsense sentence. But when a certain word would appear, my father would say, oh, pack your bags. We're going in a garden. They're bombing the city. So that we knew. Or, oh, that's my unit. We are being told to do something. Don't know why. Don't know what. And you are not supposed to know anyways. Boom. End of story. That was the extent. Yeah? I know one of the words was Gringoire or Grégoire. That I remember because I was sitting there doing my homework when it said it's going to rain or something about Grégoire. And the moment they said Grégoire, my father said, okay, pack your bags here. And effectively, they came that night to bomb Lyon. The funny part is that we were in a garden with the neighbors, and everybody was counting the planes in the sky. And everybody was thinking that bombs would only fall in the head of the German. They wouldn't. You know, with the funny attitude of the French. There were trenches built to protect you during a bombing. But the French didn't like to go into the trenches because as long as the bomb fell elsewhere, you were safe in a trench. But if the bomb fell in the trench, you had no way to survive. So I said it's better to stay out than to go into the trench. The night bombing had a very impressive effect, because when you have hundreds of planes, I don't know how many there were up there. We had neighbors who were counting planes, you know, in the garden with my father. It was saying, no, I see more than you see, because the German has its power light searchlights up there. But the massive noise of all these planes moving in the sky over the city, you felt the rumbling, a very typical rumbling. Of course, we didn't know anything about fireworks, but I can tell you one thing: a bombing is quite impressive in terms of fireworks. It is very impressive, and yeah, something to have lived through, to appreciate. Essentially, the lessons that we can learn from early childhood, that is, there are good people, and then there are other people that wish you harm. In life, what is important is to be yourself good and respected, and therefore people will help you and be on your good side and protect you. I would say most of the time. I like to think very positively, and that because we owe our life, because we did change abode various times during the war, and the family that hid us, for instance, Madame Proust, in whose house we lived, was married to a retired French colonel who died while we were staying there. All these people, they put their lives at risk. And yet they did it. And this is why we survived. It's difficult to express after such a long time the extent of the horror of it was to live on a daily basis under suspicion and fear, and yet to cope with it and to spend another day, to live with knowing of certain things that you cannot say, but are spoken harshly at home. And for instance, the fact that my grandmother, who lived with us, kept a note of a lurach and kept track of the days, the Jewish holidays, and when they were, and that it was all like in a hidden world, that you were in the shadows and you were looking for the light to come and the sun to shine eventually. And it's difficult to express that kind of, and yet life went on because you had to carry on. But there were some joyful days, alternate also, because I will remember the famous 6th of June, 1944, when suddenly, when my father opened the radio station at a German, that was the French radio station, and he announced that a suicide commando had disembarked on the coast of Normandy and were wiped out by the German troops. It was the most joyful day of our life at that moment, because my father turned around and that's it. This is not a suicide commando. They are here. And suddenly, you walked out in the street and you felt it. It's like a heavy weight had been lifted. It took a while for them to reach Lyon, till our liberation, but that was a change. It was like coming out from the dark ages. And that was a difficult part of life, and then difficult to translate. The disappearance of families and friends. We suspected that their fate was not very good. And it's true. At the end of the war, we counted ourselves to see who was still around and who passed on. But we had to live and to survive to tell for another day. That's difficult to tell.